Note to future self, fuck sentences, stick to bullet points, it's a lot easier. Alright everybody, it's Shimo here. I'm going to try a little bit more of an impromptu style, off the cuff. Just basically my thoughts and ramblings about AI, art, and illustration because YouTube will just keep shoving that in my recommended feed, and I thought I'll be a bit productive by watching some things and just spill my 2 cents on it. After watching a lot of videos on this, I think that what stuck to me the most is that a lot of these people would try to say that AI art is not art, but they're still calling it AI art. If that's the case, then why are they calling it art? It technically gives it legitimacy, you know what I mean? If they want to conquer it, they have to give it a different name. Personally, I think a better term for this is AI illustration. Part of the issue is that even amongst just regular artists, you still got people today who will say that digital art isn't real art because there's no original, for Control-C, Control-V, and there are people out there who think if you use 3D models and add a filter that it doesn't count either as any kind of artistic merit. But then they'll go ahead and pull a 180 and say that 3D modeling and 3D animation is art. Is filters, making it look hand-drawn, is that the problem? And I know a lot of these art channels trying to make the argument that AI art is theft, and the problem with art and theft in the same discussion is that it's very easy to fall on that disgusting gray area that nobody wants to or should touch. The same way how you have people who won't give digital art any credit, there are people out there who will, in this current digital age, who will assume that if you use a photograph in any way, shape, or form, it's automatically tracing and therefore you're automatically a thief. But way back in the day, even 100 years ago, for comic books and pulp covers, we had people who would use photographs as reference, some basically being clones with very minimal changes, such as faces. So it wasn't considered cheating back then, but now magically it is. Are you going to retroactively apply that pattern? And that's not even discussing the massive gray area that is fan art. If you're trying to make money off of that, you can argue that that's IP theft, but that's a whole discussion. And remember, fair use is not a hard hammered law. It's a gray area principle. It's up to the discretion of the company and the judge. It's why your fan art can easily be taken down by the IP's original holder. So for the sake of avoiding going down that crazy rabbit hole of legality, because I'm no lawyer and I want to have an argument that's much more solid and tangible, I want to focus it away from AI being seen as quote-unquote art and focus rather illustrations. Illustrations is just a pictorial rendering of an object, an action, and or an idea. And this is something that is consistent throughout any kind of book that you pick up that has images. Art itself is something that is intrinsically human and cannot be replicated by a machine. It cannot replicate feelings, it cannot replicate topics and how they are understood by the artist, and AI will never be able to replicate that unique artistic fingerprint, the way, why, and how an artist chooses to render something the way that they do. Ironically, because of this, amongst human artists, talking about art the way it is doesn't really work as a conversation for 2 points. Number one, just because something is illustrated by a person does not make it art. If I showed you Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Kentaro Miura, and Alex Ross, you probably would consider that art. But if I showed you Jeff Kinney's Diary of a Wimpy Kid, or No David No by David Shannon, and some other books, or maybe even scrapbooking, you probably wouldn't consider that art at all. But it's still handmade by a human though. To make the conversation much more tangible and much more definitive in terms of being easier to argue, I got to take the conversation as art, or whether it's abstract, and focus it as a skill. One of the big reasons is because before the 70s and 80s, you were not a quote-unquote artist. That only happened colloquially after the 70s and 80s when people were expected to be bigger than their craft. No different than how you have to think of everything like a brand today in terms of social media. Before that, you were simply your job. A painter was a painter, an architect was an architect, a voice actor was a voice actor, a singer was a singer, a sculptor was a sculptor, a pianist was a pianist. You get the gist. The difference is that sometimes illustrators were not an illustrator. Sometimes you were just the inker, the penciler, the colorist. Because illustration was not one thing but a series of tasks, sometimes broken up to multiple people, and other times given to just one person. And ever since that colloquialism, everyone just magically being an artist, you have this really weird abstract that the public conscious shares. If somebody wants to be a famous painter, or even just illustrate children's books, is that more realistic, like an architect that actually pays some good money? Or is that more seen like a dream, like trying to become a famous guitarist? Depending on your optimism and pessimism and other factors with life and businesses, you're going to have a positive or negative interpretation of that. Focusing on this as a skill makes it a lot easier to discuss things. It takes off artists who are on their high horse who think making money on Patreon makes them the new Leonardo da Vinci, but at the same time, you have artists who may feel bad about their own work, but then people would say, nah, you got a skill. You can actually make money with this thing. And makes the battlefield much more clear on what it is rather than some abstract thing of my drawings qualify as art or it doesn't qualify as art because of any personal taste as compared to some classical standard comparisons. When you're a one-person illustration team, you have to have several skills ready up your sleeve. How to draw the subject the way you want to do it, how to render it the way you want it to, as well as coloring and inking it depending on if it's analog or digital and the tools in each of those. On top of that, you have to have a bunch of subconscious skills including perspective, color theory, and hopefully you have some grasp on proportions. None of these skills are needed when you use AI, but when you look at it from a skill set point of view, AI doesn't even qualify as a skill. It's just an art director. Art directors can be helpful people who are very specific to what they want to do, but they usually fall between micromanager and being super vague, such as, I want this thing a specific shade of purple, make it happen, or that's too big, I don't like this, change that. For the most part, illustrators, if the technology goes down, they can still render it the old school fashioned way or use alternative software. If somebody chooses to render stuff with AI, if that software goes down and the internet connection goes down, there's not going to be much alternatives for them without an AI software. AI software, when used as a tool rather than as a replacement for skills, can actually yield some benefits that can help an illustrator. I do want to cover two instances where using AI illustration can actually help benefit artists in the planning and pre-production phases. Then I'll go over my grievances with AI illustration and how illustrators can potentially counter them. And yes, for the rest of this video, I won't be calling people artists, I'll be calling them illustrators to keep the frame refocused. Hughes once asked Phil Anselmo of Pantera and Down about how to create an original style that sounds unique. His answer was simple. Rip off of about 20 of your favorite influences. 20, 30. Take every influence in the world that you love personally and make it part of your repertoire. Eventually, you'll find an original style. Even though he was talking about metal bands specifically, what Phil says here can still be applied to the world of illustration. That's one potential good use that AI can have. It can help speed up that creative process of mixing those 20, 30, 40 influences together. The trick here is to use the AI in the reverse. Most people will use AI to try to make a completed picture. Instead, look at a picture that you've drawn yourself and ask yourself, what's missing? Then that's when you use the AI to help you mix those 20, 30, 40 influences to help you figure out what that missing piece is. It's no different than experimenting with food. You pick the recipe that's closest to what you already like, and then you modify it from there. You're not claiming it's a brand original secret, and once you do figure it out, you then make it all again from scratch. And only then can you truly claim it's an original. That's when you take your AI rendered thing, and then you do it by hand, be it digital or analog, render it the way you want it to, emphasize what you want to show about it. Make it the vision you truly see in your head, but able to be shown to the whole world. You can also keep the ad picture as a reference for your own visual art library, or pass it around to artists who you want to hire to actually bring your idea to life if you're trying to create something like a comic book. When AI is used like this, it's more akin to a tasteful sample in a song. You have the original and this new amalgamation, but both are different enough to warrant an existence, instead of one replacing the other. When illustrators are given a task to do, the main thing that affects the difficulty of the project is scale. A lot of times, artists tend to overplan or be underprepared. This can oftentimes lead to illustrators not planning properly for deadlines, as well as going over budget, leading to a lot of stress and other unnecessary issues that is caused by the chaos. AI illustration can also be used as a helpful planning tool to figure out the scale of a project before one even starts. For reference purposes only, one will render an entire comic to this degree of detail and scope that they want them to have. Having a quasi-demo rendered on the screen can actually help the artist understand what they're really going to go into. And from here, An artist can decide how long a project is going to take and at what pace they're going to proceed, and if the scale is too big, how much to scale back by. Sometimes this means reducing page count, other times it means removing details such as backgrounds, and in extreme cases, leads to characters being completely redesigned in order to be drawn more consistently and effectively. Again, for reference purposes, it's better to render out an entire 50-60 page comic that one might have planned and realize it's too big of scale than to start and find out only halfway through that they're not going to make the deadline on time. In this next point, this is a potential theoretical argument in favor of AI when used to mock up a document in order to hire an artist. So in this particular case, a non-artist would use AI illustration as an equalizer, akin to gun duels to even the playing field. When you have it done this way, for one issue only, you can make an AI Illustrator comic. But the point of this is not to sell the art, it's to sell the story and hope to get enough interest so that you can hire an artist for the second volume onwards, or even draw it yourself. This is a very short-term solution, and again, one issue only. Like guns in a gun duel, there will still be no substitution for hand-to-hand combat in close quarters when the time comes for it. Same thing with AI illustration. It's good to get one issue to see if people like your story and to know to pursue it, or to see if your story is garbage and not continue it at all, than it is to invest in an artist and realize nobody likes it because your story is terrible, even though you hired a human illustrator. Again, I admit this point is a theoretical one. It is controversial because most likely, sadly, people are going to try to abuse this and use it to cut out the middleman. People need to remember that AI in and of itself is simply data entry and generation, and it goes on a constant cycle based off of the data you put into it, the algorithms, and the feedback that the users give on what is quote-unquote good. And this does bring good news, because AI is going to be popular due to its simplicity, meaning that people will accept whatever mediocre rendering comes out of it because it works out of the box with very little struggle. This means that this is going to keep going in a positive feedback loop, and you can already see this happening. If you look up any AI illustration, you notice how they all start to kind of look the same past the point you can't tell the software and the people who rendered it apart? That's exactly what I mean. It's going to lead to a big case of oversaturation. And oversaturation is a serious killer. It's killed many things. It's killed trends. It killed disco. It's killing mumble rap. It's killing the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's killing comic book movies as a whole. It's killing Call of Duty. Because even though people claim they want the same old, eventually they get sick and tired of the same old when there's no changes to be had. And AI illustration is no different. People are already sick of this AI rendered style. So what's going to happen is that it's only going to get worse. People want the same thing, the same vague ideas, and it's going to make the AI rendered illustrations much more intolerable as it goes on and on. And eventually, people are going to be running back to human artists. It has something different to look at. So the question becomes, what can illustrators do to get ready for this window and capitalize on the vacuum of illustration once AI grows out of favor with the masses? The best way to do this upcoming vacuum is a surprisingly simple solution. Be as human as possible in your craft. If you have stories, lean into them more. If you have art, do stuff to stand out. Let me elaborate for a second. When it comes to things that are story-based, narrative, or even just a chapter crazy scenario of the week, you need to use the traits of your art style to really push home the emotion and direction that you want it to be. Cartoons such as home movies and Inferno Cop are great examples of this. Both of them are shows with really strange art styles and a really teeny tiny cup of noodle budget. But despite this, the characters use the animation to lean into the personalities of the characters more, which makes them stand out and enhance their comedy. Having designs that lean into the characters' emotion and expressions is going to help you out a lot more than being the same old images over and over again, like, let's say, Dilbert. Don't be afraid to go ham with your theme. You have webcomics such as The Demon King Girlfriend by Peach88 and The Nerd and Jock by Marco Racina. Both of these art is not top tier art in every category, but it feels higher than it is because they use the designs to really enhance the personalities and lean into the comedy aspects more, or even just the warm, heart fuzzy moments, which means more emotion and readers can connect to the characters a lot more. And in some cases, if the emotions are really played to well enough, you'll have fans who will willingly go out of the way to dub the comics and double and triple down on the emotions, which could even get you more followers. I'm just saying. This can even happen if your work is controversial. Look at Shadman, BattleBuddy, and Kylary. Shadman, I think, needs no introduction. For the two of you who don't know who he is, his content can range from raunchy to really uncomfortable to really dark humor that has been criticized for being in very, very poor taste. But given that it's dark comedy, it has its fans, and criticism just comes with the territory. He, once upon a time, used to make enough money to support himself living in the state of California where he last resided. And California is not a cheap place at all. BattleBuddy, just like Shadman, also has some raunchy comics, but the difference is that he played a bit more of the comedic angle in terms of satire. He listened to his fans in the comments section, as well as some Twitter polls, and started to make fun of tropes more and more while still making his unique art style, helping with the punchlines. Eventually, he once held a Twitter poll, and when he did that, he found out most of his fans came for his parody and satire instead of his full-on not safe for work content, so now he does Patreon, flavor of the week scenarios, and people seem to love it just fine. The last one of this trio is Kylary. The difference is that, unlike the other two where he had more story-based comics, his experience is a bit more of an interactive one. What he does is that he has scenarios with various popular anime characters that are in line with their personality. The difference is that he takes the punchline you would normally hear and cranks it up to about a 10. And then, here comes the fun part. He makes it like a Where's Waldo game where if you can find the hidden little jokes, details, and Easter eggs, and there's always one additional thing that's hidden that turns that batshit crazy 10 into a 13. So much so he's gotten backlash a couple of times because the punchlines were deemed a little too dark, but that's his shtick. Fans are pointing out the things they see in the comments section, they're tagging other people, they're giving suggestions what they think it could be, and sometimes he takes those suggestions and turns them into follow-up panels, or a different scenario with the same characters, or sometimes he just replies. But this creates a new level of interactivity which keeps him popular on Twitter and the algorithm. Sometimes you don't have to have the most amazing style in the world. It's what you do with that art style like Kylary. There's lots of digital painters way better than him, but his sense of humor and sense of morbid curiosity garnered him his audience. A quick tidbit out there for those of you who are interested in entering the world of political cartoons. There's nothing wrong with political cartoons, but just make sure that that you have satire that has a point to it and not just my opponent is an idiot, because that's not brilliant satire, that's just mocking. And when you mock, unlike satire, you cannot convince people. And two, if you're going to do something, don't use the exact same setup and the exact same punchline with the exact same points being made. Add something a little different or make the joke funnier, or don't be afraid to exaggerate it for a laugh. When you do that, people remember you and stand out because they might actually like your stuff even though they don't agree with you because you can prove a point. That's how good satire works. Don't just say, oh, everyone says this is what this political opinion entails, therefore I have to portray all the opponents like this. In that case, there's 20, 30, 40, hundreds of you guys out there. Give me something that is enhanced by your art style that makes me want to like your satire. You don't want to be so overly safe in your style that you become offensive to look at, like those corporate art. You're going to need to commit to a style that has any actual identity, but when you do that, you're committing to a personality in that style. And remember, personalities are eventually going to rub somebody the wrong way. You just can't help it. Not everyone is going to like everything. Look at Mad Magazine, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Ren and Stimpy, Battle Royale, Squidbillies. These are just a few series that are really popular amongst a lot of people, but some people can never get into them despite their quality writing and comedy and emotion, simply because the art style is just too off-putting. At that point, fuck them. Just focus on your followers. Focus on the people who are actively supporting you and rooting for you. Don't try to cater to people who will never like your product, even if you change. Sure, a style has to be unapologetically you, but when it goes against AI Illustration, what can we do to help even the odds? Especially if you don't have a support system like Patreon or Ko-Fi. Your illustration style must not only be unapologetically you, but so must the content. See, a lot of AI illustrators are going to try to do the same popular characters like 2B and Samus Aran, for example, doing the same poses over and over, like the Jacko pose, in the same safe styles over and over again. So, what you're going to want to do is when you draw content, make sure it's unapologetically you in terms of the interests, the habits, the topics even. Remember, any illustration you put out there can potentially get you famous. So if you're putting out an illustration more so to game the system and get popular than you are to put out things that you like, don't be surprised if that illustration that is gaming the system gets popular, and then you have to keep doing that and replicating that in order to stay relevant. If you're going to be an artist and you're going to be unhappy drawing what you're doing, why would you want to do that? Unless you really need the money, and in that case have a separate handle and a separate account to everything. Feel free to interact with your audience via polls, comment section, just avoid the trolls. And the last thing I would recommend is if you don't want to be replaced by an AI illustration tool that is just going to replicate constantly data input, try to avoid the big, popular, trendy styles, because the more popular they are, the more these art styles are going to be fed into the data of the AI, and it's going to generate more illustrations this way. So, while if your AI is going to try to replace you by making the same style that can easily be replicated, why would you willingly copy an art style that can easily be replicated? I think that's just common sense to me. Not to mention that most of these ripoffs, when they copy one another, only change about 10% in a way that really doesn't matter, that you can just shuffle them all in there and you cannot tell them apart. So, here are 5 styles I would really recommend you not imitate without making some substantial changes for you to stand out, okay? Again, substantial changes, that's the trick here. The first style I would recommend going against is the Gothic 40k. It's Gothic Warhammer 40k fan art done in a black and white monochrome painted style. It's so popular, it's basically become its own subsection of Warhammer fan art, especially after the popularity of Veronica Arathne. Not sure how to pronounce that. The problem here is that it's such a popular style that it's very easy to be imitated, even amongst just humans themselves. So much so, you could even just take older 40k fan art and slap a monochrome filter over it. If you do attempt this style, I recommend that you draw either with a different kind of decorative style that's not simply Gothic, add into it to separate yourself from other imitators, or paint topics and subjects you normally would not see painted in that Gothic 40k style. I don't see a lot of comedic works being done in that style, so perhaps there's an opening there. Just don't be surprised if you see someone use your digital painting for their Sigma Grindset Funk Slow and Reverb album cover. Be careful. The second style I would really recommend against trying is the pseudo-anime. Anime, of course, we all know it's gotten popular from the 90s onwards, especially the late 2010s now with Attack on Titan and that whole wave of my first mature anime. Even then, we already had good homages like The Last Airbender and The Boondocks. Some of them, were smart enough to take elements from them and work to their advantage, like Barry Mystery, the 2000s, Teen Titans, and Megas XLR. You see, however, this recent breed of pseudo-anime, like the Neo Yokio and Voltron Legendary Defender and the other Netflix things like Castlevania, art style is in a very disgusting and annoying middle ground. If there's someone out there who doesn't like anime, they are going to just not like your thing and be turned out completely. If you're talking to a veteran who's been around since the 90s or even the early 2000s, it's going to remind them of all the crappy, mediocre how to draw anime books that came out that they weren't the real thing, obviously, because like pseudo-anime, but they're trying to charge you the full premium price because almost nobody carried the real deal in English, and if they had it, you were paying an arm and a leg, 4 or 5 times the price even. And because of this, lots of anime veterans who had to grow up with that conundrum before the golden age of YouTube having lots of art tutorials will see the pseudo-anime style as something that's insincere, something that tries to pass itself off as the genuine article when it's a half-assed bootleg at best. And nowadays, there's not really an excuse considering you already have had lots of foreigners go into Japan to animate in the authentic style, as well as a plethora of Twitter illustrators who have managed to create an anime style that looks convincing while still adding their own unique touches. So doing the pseudo-anime here is only going to put you in that very uncanny valley that doesn't really win either side over. And the final reason you should not do the pseudo-anime is because, like I said earlier, Netflix has so many anime planned it's not even funny. And Netflix is super popular because everybody's got Netflix. That means anybody in the future can watch the pseudo-anime that Netflix produces, take a screenshot of it, and feed it to an AI no problem. And of course, with Netflix being popular, everyone is going to try to copy the art style inevitably. So with a bunch of humans trying to copy that same style and a bunch of AI getting input data right from the source, not even fan imitations, then you may as well not really lean to that. It's just better to be full-on Western with some flair or full-on anime with some flair, but that middle ground, it's not going to be very stable. It's a bridge about to collapse. Third style I would recommend against is called the Animator. It's pretty much what it sounds like. Anime style but painted. The difference is that there's a very specific method. Skin is pale except for muscles. Fabrics are detailed as well as metals, but other than that, everything tends to be soft and set up by contrast rather than texture. Backgrounds are usually simple and nature themed, but some will actually add a full background. This actually does take some skill to do. The problem here is that there are quite a few artists who have been made so synonymous with the style, anybody even inspired by them gets called their rip-off. Just Akimi-chan, Winko, Itar Draws, and Zumi Draws, just to name a few. You can always change it up a bit and stand out, which is what you should do, like Aroma Sensei and Dandon Fuga do. But again, the first four I mentioned are well-established legacy, so any kind of deviation might be going towards an uphill battle. And in the case of AI illustration, this appears to be a very popular source of being put in for data recognition. The other thing I want to say is that despite these big four being called the quote-unquote definitive people, is that they didn't even truly invent the style. It's merely a case of emulating the splash art you would see on video games, specifically things like League of Legends. And remember, League of Legends had a show on Netflix called Arcade, so guess what art style everyone else is also going to be copying. Once again, if you're going to do this because you're a digital painter, be more so like Aroma Sensei and Dandon Fuga in the sense that you add stuff to stand out, and don't just have the same old where they literally look exactly the same, or worse, look exactly like an AI illustrated work, but with better hands. The fourth design I really recommend against strongly is the Tumblr art style. It's only called the Tumblr art style because of how easy and mass-produced it is on the website Tumblr, no doubt. Just think of shows like Dead End, Paranormal Park, or She-Ra Princess of Power if you need an example. A lot of illustrators of all kinds, digital and traditional, really hate the style because it tries to play it safe but does so in the worst way and becomes a terrible art style overall. Designs are overly simple and usually too round because they hate hard edges, afraid of creating a design that can be offensive and rough on the eyes, but then are also so afraid of being so dull that they have so much color, especially pastels and neons, that it winds up assaulting your eyes anyways. And an extra feature I've noticed, especially when it comes to like extreme actions like punches and high jumps, is that the action never really gets the full commitment. As a result, there's movement, but there's no impact or real weight to any significant movement at all, so it always feels rigid as a result. The fact the style is made synonymous with a website, and that website has that style basically everywhere, shows that it's very easy to replicate and therefore automatically an unsafe choice. However, the worst thing about this style is that there's this really weird extreme variant where the rules of art just seem to not even exist. No basic proportions, let alone proportion consistency on models, no regard for color theory, no regard for perspective. You can't really even tell if it was deliberately done as an artistic choice, or it was because the rules of art were never learned, or they are unable to apply said rules because maybe they don't know. If you want to see an example of this in a published work for illustration, check out the book Nubia OV1, which was published by DC Comics as a quote-unquote graphic novel. The character models are inconsistent with always changing heights, the colors are hard to read, and they don't really convey information or tone well, and the lack of proportions in scenes, especially with perspective, it makes the whole work feel off. There's a difference between having warped perspective to bend the rules of proportion and anatomy to drive home a certain tone, be it an odd feeling, tension, anger, whatever. And then there's doing what Nubia does, where you just have really inconsistent art so it looks bad. You just kind of hope we don't call you out because your graphic novel needs to have illustrations in there somewhere. The three works I mentioned, the two Netflix animations and the comic, were also just not bad in their art, but also really inconsistent and mushy in their stories. So, these got bad ratings, and they failed. So, now the Tumblr style has that stigma of just being no good in quality at all. Not good illustration, not good story, not good output, and most of these things wind up canceled after the first couple of issues or even after one season. And for this reason, even if you are that miracle diamond in the rough that magically cracks the code, remember what I said about bad art being hard to sell to some people. This is the rare instance where the art style is basically nearly universally hated amongst the masses. So if you take the style, it's going to be a real uphill fight and a very good chance that you're not going to make it. So you might want to look for a simple style that still can have the vibrant colors that you want, but remember to keep consistency and not delve into any of the traps that make this Tumblr style very unappealing to most people. The last style I really recommend against is the Cal Art style. This style was also not invented by Cal Arts, but again, a lot of graduates who want making hit shows use this style, hence the name Cal Arts. This style is arguably the antithesis to the Tumblr style. It's simple and safe in detail in all the right places. It was made to have some degree of detail but still be fluid so that one person, usually an independent animator or a student animator, could finish an entire short film single-handedly, marked around the 10-minute mark. The biggest pro is the biggest con of the Cal Art style. It's relatively easy to replicate the style one-to-one. Proportions still need to be kept in mind, but the bean mouth is an art meme for a reason. You have shows such as OKKO, Clarence, We Bare Bears, Star vs. the Forces of Evil, Steven Universe, and many others that have been forgotten. There's only 4 real shows that have had any impact with the Cal Art style in a positive and meaningful manner, and these 4 still have an influence today. Adventure Time, Gravity Falls, Regular Show, and Gumball. Although we gotta remember, Gumball's main cast is predominantly Cal Arts, but everything else is stop motion, claymation, CGI, and many other styles. I've seen this online more than a few times, but there are people who want to learn how to draw, but they believe that they can't do it, or they just want to get the most out of the minimal amount of input. So they learn the Cal Art style and never evolve, and it becomes a crutch. This is one big reason alone why you should avoid the Cal Art style, outside of the fact that every animated cartoon nowadays is practically the Cal Art style. It's very easy to fall to the pit of this being a crutch. If Cal Art is industry standard, why should you bother and dare to go above and beyond unless you really just want to do it for a personal reason? Also, outside of the big 4 2000s cartoons, again, Adventure Time, Gravity Falls, Regular Show, and Gumball, there has been no long-lasting impact Cal Arts cartoon. Maybe Steven Universe, but let's give it another 6 years and see if it holds up in the mainstream. Because the other ones have already been over 10 years and they're still holding up pretty strong. It really does feel like those big 4 Cal Arts tunes were great because they had a lot of heavy lifting in the story department, and people are just imitating that style in hopes that they'll be the next generation of the big 4 of Cal Arts cartoons. But a lot of these newer Cal Arts cartoons and comics tend to be very dialogue heavy, and they forget to balance the movement and energy, unlike cartoons that came nearly 60-70 years prior, like Looney Tunes, the old school Mickey Mouse, and even Chowder, which was only a few years before that. The way it's being used, it feels like people are using Cal Arts more to recreate that success, but in reality it was really lightning in a bottle because you had showrunners who had a story to tell and just chose to do so in the Cal Arts style. For these reasons, and not just the fact that it's industry standard and everyone's learning the style, you need to be wary of falling into the trap of being a crutch and this lack of detail being used alongside a lack of character development. If you want to do Cal Arts, make sure you have your designs be fun, creative, and memorable, unlike a lot of other cartoons like Sanjay and Craig, and make sure you actually go full top-notch with the energy like those big 4 tunes did. Do that, and you might stand a chance of standing out against a sea of original characters happen to be done in Cal Arts. One last general piece of advice I want to give to you is just, if something is popular, there's always going to be imitated. All the artists I mentioned way earlier, like Bao Buddy, Kai Larry, Sakimi-chan, and even other artists that I didn't mention, if it's popular, there are going to be imitators regardless. So as a result, you need to do what I said for everything else. Add something, stand out. There are so many people trying to copy the Bao Buddy and Kai Larry formulas that they add nothing new, and the thing is they do it worse than the originals, so why bother check out an imitation? And if you do just as good a job as an imitation, why does it really matter if I pick between you or the original? Give me a reason why I should pick you as much or more than the person you're trying to imitate. So if you're trying to imitate, let's say, the style of Dragon Ball Z, what would make me want to follow your Dragon Ball Z art? What are you doing when you're copying into the 80s cartoons like He-Man, Brave Star, and the like, and Ninja Turtles? what are you adding, or what is your take on that style that makes me want to check your stuff out if I don't already love the AI style? Tell me a reason why I should follow you and remember you by name. Remember, AI can only duplicate whatever data gets put into it, so you have to do the things that AI cannot replicate, the human drive. Be unapologetically you in your interests, be unapologetically you in how you render your drawings, be unapologetically you in how you choose to convey those things, and be unapologetically you that isn't just your signature, that makes people want to remember you and defend you when AI is an equally viable option. Until then, this is Shimo signing off. Take care, draw on, and raise those fucking horns.